Good morning. Yeah, as we get into this last session, I've been asked to focus our attention on the future. Not by providing scenarios for the far distant future and tell you when flying cars will be coming or when your fridge will restock itself with beers for the weekend, but rather to look at tomorrow's world and work out what you and your team can do to anticipate change maybe better than you do now, so that we're less surprised than maybe we often are. Surprise is a wonderful thing when it comes to birthday parties and Christmas presents and so on. Surprise is not a really good business strategy, is it? And so we need to do better at anticipating what might come in the future. But before I talk about the future, let me take you back a century, back to 100 years ago. Two guys who were probably the most famous economists, financial advisors, and two of the richest people in the world. I don't know if their faces are familiar to you. Maybe one of their names is familiar. On the right-hand side, you have John Maynard Keynes. And if you've done any business studies, you might have heard of Keynesian economics. That's named after him. He's a British guy, and I'll get to him in a second. The guy on the left, though, was even more famous and even richer than him. His name was Irving Fisher. He was an American. Irving Fisher had been born poor, but he did a very smart thing early in life. He fell in love with a very rich girl, whose parents then died. And when he got married, his wife treated them to a 14-month honeymoon on an around-the-world tour. Nice. But he didn't just sit back and use the family in-laws' money. He made a lot of money himself. In 1910, he published a book called How to Live, which was one of the best-selling books of all time at that point. Sold more than 2 million copies 100 years ago. I wouldn't recommend it, by the way. It is available for free online, but it's flipping racist. It was 100 years ago, written by a white guy in America. But anyway, the point is, he made some money. He then also invented something some of you, if you're older than 35, might remember. You might even have had one, called a Rolodex. This guy invented it. I mean, it doesn't feel like something that needs inventing. But he sold the patent in today's money for $62 million to the Rolodex company, who more than made that money back over the rest of the century selling it. But hey, somebody had to have the idea. The guy who did was Irving Fisher. He's probably most famous and made most of his money by printing a weekly financial report called the Irving Fisher Business Report. And it was syndicated across hundreds of newspapers in America and around the world, in which he told people which stocks they should buy and how they should invest their money. And people who listened to his advice made a fortune. So did he. Super rich guy. On the other side of the Atlantic was John Maynard Keynes, who, very different life story. He had grown up in one of those rich homes. He went to Eton. 2 prime ministers of England were his best friends. He became an advisor to the government by the time he was 30. At age 27, he was a fellow of the King's College, Cambridge, and a lecturer and professor in economics, the youngest ever economics professor at Cambridge. Also a crazy lunatic as well. I suppose if you've got lots of money and nothing else to do with your life, you can do crazy stuff. And one example was in 1914, as World War I was just beginning. Some of the art galleries in Paris said, well, we don't want the Germans to come and either burn the place to the ground, bomb it out, or just steal the art. So they put word out to all the rich families across Europe that they were going to auction their art, and that the rich families must come and get the art, because they'd rather have it looked after by rich families through what was clearly going to be a big war. Anyway, he took, in today's money, 30 million pounds of his own family's money, and managed to get the British government to give him another 30 billion pounds, literally hopped on a boat with a suitcase full of cash, hopped across to Paris. The story goes that during the auction, the building next door to the art gallery was actually bombed by the Germans. That's how close this thing was. He bought a whole lot of paintings, a whole lot of Cézannes and Monets, and later on, about 10 years later, when an evaluation or valuation of the art was done, you won't be surprised to discover that the British government had done very well. It more than doubled the value of that investment, but the stuff that he bought for his family had more than increased by 10 times. So, yeah, he did well for the government, did really well for himself. It's a South African story as well. Anyway, John Maynard Keynes. So these two guys were the richest guys at the time. And after the First World War in the 1920s, both of them had very similar advice for investors. And as economists, they just said, invest in growth. Look for businesses that are growing. Don't even worry what industry they're in. Don't look anything further than are they growing, and just throw money at them, because the cycle of boom and bust is over. We're in the roaring 20s. It's magnificent. No one can lose any money anywhere, anytime. Some of you know a little bit about financial history to know why I stopped the graph at 1929. Specifically, why I might have stopped it on the 24th of October, 1929. We now call it Black Thursday. The Great Depression began that day. And if you carry on the graph, 3 years later, both of those guys had lost more than 85% of their wealth. Crash and burn time. They died within a year of each other. John Maynard Keynes at the end of 1946, Irving Fisher at the beginning of 1947. John Maynard Keynes died a very rich man. He had made all his money back and more, and survived the Second World War as well, with his wealth intact. Irving Fisher died bankrupt. In fact, he died owing people money, and he had a rotten reputation because he kept on chasing get-rich-quick schemes, and he kept on trying to get his friends to invest in stuff. I'm guessing if he'd been around today, he would have sold you both Amway and Bitcoin. That was the kind of guy that he was, which is probably why you haven't heard about him. But John Maynard Keynes, we've got a whole school of economics named after him. He made it to the cover of Time magazine 20 years after his death, at the end of the 1960s. And his economic theories are still used today. So why? What's the difference between these two guys? And I hope that as I share the answer to that question, you'll understand why I start a presentation about the future 100 years in the past. Because his answer to how did you get it right after the Great Depression is this famous quotation: "When my information changes, I alter my conclusions." What do you do? When the world around me changes, when the circumstances change, I know enough, I understand enough, I'm a big enough person to say, well, maybe I shouldn't keep doing it that way. Maybe I need to change. If you're interested in investments and finances, the shift that he made was to say, actually, as it happens, you need to look at a company. You need to understand their strategy. You need to be confident with their management and leadership. You need to understand that the industry that they're in and the products and services they are offering is in demand by the market. And then you have to invest in that company and keep your investment in that company for at least 20 years. That's what Warren Buffett bases his investment strategies on, and he learned it directly from John Maynard Keynes. So he made the shift after being very badly burnt. When the world around us is changing and the rules for success and failure are being rewritten, do you alter your approach? Do you change your mind? Or do you grit your teeth and hope it's all going to turn out okay in the end? A few years ago, I was speaking at a conference, and Bill Gates was the headline keynote speaker at the beginning of the London School of Economics. So in 2015, he was asked to look ahead at this decade we're now in, the 2020s. And his belief, and I think he got it spot on, and I think he's been proven correct, is that the 2020s is going to be one of the most significant decades of change in human history. We've spent the last 30 or 40 years creating building blocks for change. Think about technology. We've created supercomputers that can literally fit in your pocket and your handbag. You call them a phone, but it's about the least thing you do with that supercomputer in your pocket. It's insane amounts of power. And then we've built the Wi-Fi connections, and we've got LTE and 5G on the way. We've got fiber, maybe, it depends where you are, I suppose, but it's coming if it's not there yet. We've then created this massive global interconnected system, and then something like ChatGPT or artificial intelligence can be launched in November last year. The fourth version was released yesterday, and it passed the final year law exam in New York yesterday with a 90% result. It's, 17 weeks old? You have to change its nappy before you use ChatGPT. But it is exploding and changing our world. It's got more than 1.5 billion users, fastest growing consumer app of all time. And that's just one example of 100 examples that we could look at of things that are about to change the world, and over the next few years will change the world dramatically. And you know this in your industry. People who understand your industry understand the impact of technology and systems change and political and economic systems that are shifting, and even demographic shifts that are changing your world more now than at any other time in our history. But we've got a problem. And our problem is that our brains are not programmed to deal with dramatic change. Our brains are programmed to see the world as we know it to be. Even though we've got imaginations and even though we do strategic planning, we are limited. The very things that make you good at what you do, the very things that get you into this room as one of the people who's a leader in your industry, who's got a track record for success, your experience, your expertise, your education, and everything that you've done, all of those things, in fact, work against you when there's deep, significant change taking place. If you're a visual learner, then maybe this is useful. It's like putting blinkers on a racehorse. You don't put those blinkers on to blind the horse. You put those blinkers on so the horse will just see the lane it's supposed to be running in and will run as fast as it can and try and win the race. So the horse can do its job, run the race, win the race. But don't be distracted. That's what you do. You do what you do in whatever part of this industry you are, whether it's in the farming or the packaging or the logistics or whatever part of it. You're good at what you do, and you do it in the best way you know how. But that means that there's a whole lot of stuff going on that might surprise you when it eventually comes into your field of vision. This is what's happening with us all the time. And so if my presentation has a theme, the theme is that we need to learn how to rethink and unlearn. We need to learn how to take those blinkers off and see what's happening in the world around us. And well, let me just prove to you how important this is and how difficult it is. So I'm going to show you a video in a second, which is a murder mystery. And I want you to see if you can solve the murder mystery. The lord of the manor has been murdered. There were only 3 people in the house, the maid, the housekeeper, and his wife. One of them is definitely the murderer. The policeman, the detective have arrived. And you're going to listen to the interviews and see if you can work out who done it. You ready?
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
That's right, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Okay, so you couldn't have worked that out. It's a bit of a trick. How many of you saw the changes? Maybe not all 21. How many of you saw any changes? Okay, I've got maybe 12 hands in the whole room. Some of you are saying, what are you talking about, Graeme? What changes are you talking about? This is how it started, right? And I had this scene up in front of you for a minute. So it was lodged in your mind. This is how it ended. Pretty much everybody's changed their clothes. Every single ornament in the room is changed. Even the dead guy is different. The carpet he's lying on is changed. And only 12 people, those of you who put your hands up, just shout out sort of how many roughly. I'm sure you didn't get all 21. You got one. The thing the guy was holding. Oh, you saw the bear changing from the suit of armor. The real one that most people pick up, it's the one you're supposed to notice so that you then realize it's going on. He from holding a rolling pin to a candlestick. Which is a little bit obvious. Some of you knew it was the wife all along, because it's always the wife. You just wanted to work out how. Now, some of you are wondering, how did this happen and how did I miss all of that? Let me just show this to you. And sound guys, this is deliberately softer because I want to talk over it, so don't ride it up for me. If we look at the scene from a different angle, if you're taking notes, you might want to write that down. If you look at the scene from a different angle, this camera in the front here is obviously focusing for us, and it's tracking. I mean, I wonder how many hours they spent practicing this to make sure you didn't see anything else. I love the old guy just crawling in and then dying. Thanks, dude. Lovely. Actually, as it happens, this was an advert for cyclist safety in Belgium. It was, if you can't see it, then so keep your eyes open. So why did you miss those 21 changes? I mean, some of you, that's a little bit like disturbed you now, that you missed that. Obviously, I tricked you. Obviously, there was a bit of misdirection. But literally, I told you that I was about to prove to you that you've got a problem with your brain, that when you focus on one thing, you can't see the other stuff. Literally, I told you I was about to do that, and even then, only 12 of you spotted only maybe one thing. Because this is how your brain works. There's nothing you can do about it except accept that this is how your brain works, and then learn a few skills to deal with it. Maybe the question that's worth asking is, what are you missing because of what you measure and focus on? What you measure, we saw presentations this morning, lots of graphs and different things that you're measuring. All of those things are important. You at your fingertips, you've got all the stats and statistics and the information and the ratios that make your part of this industry work. Brilliant. But that is a very narrow focus. And one of the things you have to do to get yourself through the rest of this decade is just take those blinkers off and be careful that the things you focus on do not blind you to the changing world around us. So if that's the reality of our world, then let me help you. And I want to, in the time that I've got, just give you 3 things that you and your team can do. 3 things that if you focus on these for the next few months and years, you'll start taking those blinkers off. They're not magic wands, they're not going to solve all of your problems, but they are going to give you something that you can just sneak into your weekly schedule, just a few minutes here or there, and honestly, it will make all the difference in the world to you. Those three things are embracing disruption, experimenting more, and empowering your team. Let's look at those in order. So, what do I mean by embrace disruption? The starting point here, the first thing I'd ask you to do, is something that maybe you would say, well, Graeme, I'm already doing this. But it's to acknowledge that we live at a moment in history where we're not just going through a little challenge. We're not just going through a time of change where you can grit your teeth and maybe just get through the other side, and then everything will go back to normal. It'll be like it used to be, and you can do the things you've always done, and it'll all be fine. You have to acknowledge that we are at a moment of deep structural change in the way that the world works. There are no exceptions. I don't know of any industry or any sector or any part of the world where that statement is not true. Literally down to religion. Religions around the world are changing right now. When the Pope keeps coming up in the Catholic Church and saying things that are upending stuff that's happened over centuries. A crazy example. A few weeks ago, the Pope was asked about gay marriage. And the Pope said, who am I to give an opinion on whether two people who are in love can get married? Who am I? Dude, you're the Pope. It's like literally your job to have an opinion on stuff. Love it. COVID, of course, is a fantastic example. It would be a horrible thing to waste the crisis of COVID by spending the rest of 2023 trying to pretend it never happened. What do I mean by that? I mean, if your whole goal for 2023 is to try and get back to the way things were before COVID, I think you've misunderstood the assignment. COVID wasn't just a challenge that happened and now it's over and now we can carry on. COVID changed the world. COVID accelerated a lot of other changes that were coming anyway but might have taken longer to get here, but boom, now they're here. It's changed people's expectations of how the world works. To give you practical examples, it has dramatically increased e-commerce all around the world. And if you're in a part of the industry that connects with e-commerce, if you're selling to customers and clients around the world and you haven't got your e-commerce properly sorted, you will be left in the dust. Nobody's going to give you time to catch up with that. Nobody's going to say, well, I know it takes some time to get your website sorted out and get your e-commerce system sorted out. Nonsense. It doesn't. Companies, this might be less significant for you in your industry, but companies that now are saying to their staff, you have to come back to the office. COVID is over. Many, especially of their younger talent, many of those young people will say, you know what, I would rather resign. I would rather not have a job than work in your office. I'd love to have this job, and I've proven for 3 years I can do it from home. So what the hell are you telling me that I have to get into rush hour traffic? Rush hour traffic, one of the dumbest things human beings have ever done. That all of us have to go to the office at exactly the same time. And then at the end of the day, we repeat the process in the reverse. What the hell are we thinking? It's unnecessary, and today's young people say, more than unnecessary, I ain't going to do it. But there's an even higher level thing going on. For the last 150 years or so, two big systems have been fighting it out to say, pick me, I'm the one that will make a better world. It's capitalism and communism. And halfway in between, trying to get the best of both worlds, is socialism. And all of these systems have failed. We don't have a better life. It's harder and harder and harder to be middle class, if middle class even exists anymore. Most of us in this room, as hard as we've worked, as many assets as we've got, we're a few months away from bankruptcy and collapse. That's not a good life, but we have a good life in comparison to millions and billions of other people. Is this now the end of history? Is this what everything was about? Is this, congratulations, it works? Or have we reached a point in history where a whole lot of people are saying, guys, it's not working? By the way, I think communism and capitalism have both failed for the same reason. Neither of them were ever implemented properly anyway, but the main reason both of them have failed is that the rich people have taken too much money out. Simple. In both cases. We've got to find a new way. And the new way is not some different version of these ways. It is a brand new way. If you had gone to people 300 years ago and say, you're going to live in a country that doesn't have kings and queens, they would have said, what? It's not possible. Can't imagine it. We live at a moment where we can't yet imagine what the new systems will be, but they'd better come quickly. Preferably before Monday. Because that's kind of what's going on. I lived in London for 5 years, and I chose to come back to South Africa for this reason. I'm not joking about this. This is my life. My passion is this kind of philosophical stuff. Most farmers don't really like my... So look, we have to have a few bottles of wine before we start seeing each other's worlds more clearly. But this is my world of thoughts. Because I want to be in a country where I think the new system is going to emerge. You heard from Bruce Whitfield, he and I are good friends. You heard from him yesterday, and I agree with his view. That, yeah, we're in a bit of chaos at the moment, but you know what happens in chaos? If we put the effort in, if we know what's going on, if we're prepared to see it for what it is, something amazing is going to emerge. And it can emerge here, it can emerge somewhere else. I think if I wasn't South African, I might have chosen Brazil. If I didn't choose Brazil, I might have looked at South Korea or Singapore. But hey, this is my home, and I hope it happens here, because I think it could. We are a country that is both first and third world properly. We've got developed and developing world alongside each other. And then we've got this added Ubuntu that just, well, we try to not kill each other too often. But I wonder what this looks like in your industry. I wonder what the new things that might emerge over the next few years are. I'm not here as a consultant or expert in your industry, so I'll leave those conversations to you. But I wonder if, in the next 3 to 5 years, it isn't about working out how we've done what we've always done, but better. I wonder if there's new things that are about to emerge that you've never done before. At the moment, maybe they're not clear to you because they're not in your field of vision. But if you open your eyes up to them, I wonder what might happen. And I wonder what you might need to rethink and unlearn in order to achieve some of the ambitions of this industry. I don't think you can achieve the ambitions of the increase in yield, of the increase in exports, of the increase in your per kilogram profit and so on. I don't think you can achieve those by just doing what you've always done, but a little bit better. I think you've got to think new thoughts. I think you've got to try new things. So why don't you just take, literally, I'm going to give you 90 seconds. Turn to the person next to you. You've had a whole day yesterday. You've had some stuff this morning. But if I were to ask you a simple question, what do you think are the biggest things that we have to rethink and unlearn? How would you answer that question? Tell the person next to you. Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Obviously, that's not the end of a conversation, that's the start of a conversation. And one that you've already started, but I hope that you continue. The language here is that you need to develop strategic imagination. Take those blinkers off, whatever words work for you. Here's how you could do it. And a lot of my clients do this, and they tell me it's one of the best things they've ever done. Once a week, whenever you get together with your staff, with your team, take 5 minutes to think about the future. 5 minutes to think about these disruptions. This question I've just asked you, what do we need to rethink and unlearn? Ask that question, get a long list of the answers. Then hand those things out to members of your team. It might be using technology better. It might be trying out drones, or it might be looking for different suppliers and partners. It might, whatever it is, there's going to be a list. Hand that list out to different members of your team. And when I say different members, I mean everybody in your team. I can't imagine there's anybody in your team that you would want to exclude from this process, because you want to up everybody's game. Some of them are going to be better at it than others, but you want to up everybody's game. You allocate a topic and a date. So that my 12 friends who saw different changes, each of you take one thing, and it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now, and it's literally a 5-minute conversation. You don't have to do a research project. It's just, what's the topic you've been given? What are the 3 things you can imagine the impact would be? And then let's have a quick conversation. 5-6 minutes, you can time it. If the conversation looks like it's coming alive, you then say, well, this looks like something we should be talking about. Let's schedule some time later in the week. But literally, you do this once a week for the rest of the year. That'll mean you've got about 30 of them or so to do. About half of them you'll think, okay. But about 10 of them will blow you away, blow your team away. And it'll just up the thinking as you embrace disruption and build in systems to talk about it, think about it, and hopefully anticipate change more. Make sense? Now, if you're watching your time, you'll see I've only got 10 minutes left, and I've got 2 other things to give you, but hopefully these 2 things will make sense and don't need a lot of explanation, given what I've just said. The path to success is not filled with lots of successes. We know this. This is obvious. But what we need to do is build in a mindset, a culture of experimentation. Not everywhere is worth experimenting, right? Some of you are thinking, Graeme, don't tell my team this because they're going to burn the place down if we give them carte blanche. If you've misunderstood what I'm trying to say, if that's your thought. Maybe what we need to just say is, instead of the word experiment, we need to say we need to give ourselves and our team permission to ask curiosity-led questions. What would happen if? What if? Why not? And to push ourselves. This is Andre Geim, Professor Andre Geim, who works at the University of Manchester. He's the only person in the world who's won both the Nobel Prize and the Ig Nobel Prize. Have you ever heard of the Ig Nobel Prize? It's a very cool prize. It's given to a scientist, a proper scientist, who's published an academic paper in a scientific journal that everybody else looks at and goes, what? What the hell were you thinking? How did you get funding? That's crazy. But actually, interesting. It's a very specialist kind of field. He won an Ig Nobel Award in 2001 for discovering that you can levitate frogs using magnets. I don't know if you know this, but every single thing in the world can be affected by magnets. It's not just those iron filings you played with at high school. And it's not just metal. Even water is attracted by magnets, as long as you've got big enough magnets properly aligned. And his team every Friday afternoon would go for a nice big pub lunch, get a little bit tipsy, come back to the lab and just mess around. It was Mess Around Fridays. And on one of these, they discovered this, that they could levitate things. Then they thought, well, we're going to have to get attention for this information. What is the biggest thing that we can levitate that would sound the most interesting in the newspapers? And they said, well, let's see if we can levitate frogs from the biology lab. And they discovered that they could. So they published a paper, and they won the Ig Nobel Award because everybody said, what the hell were you thinking? Sometimes you've got to look at somebody and say, that's a very good and interesting thing, because this is what maglev trains are based on. So this is how you get bullet trains and that, because of this, what they learned from that. So there's very interesting applications. But it's kind of like, I'm thinking, as I say, I'm a city guy, not a farm guy. But I've always wondered, the first person who discovered that we could drink cow's milk, what was he trying to do? You know, thanks for working that out, but so the Ig Nobel Award. In 2010, in the same lab, on the same Friday afternoon, doing the same crazy stuff, and I won't tell the whole story for time, he discovers how to make graphene cheaply. Now, if you've never heard of graphene, it's the wonder material that's about to come. It's 20 times stronger than steel, but it's transparent like glass. It can conduct electricity 10 times better than copper and heat 100 times better than any other metal. And it's lighter than air because it's a single layer of carbon. It's going to change the world, except it's way too expensive. But he found a cheap way of making it by messing around with pencil shavings and sellotape. Go and read the story. And he won the Nobel Award for Physics because of it. Why? Because he was prepared to experiment. Because he tried things that he didn't know would work. Again, not so big that you blow the lab up and burn the building down, but you've got to experiment more than you do. We're going to survive the future not by predicting more carefully and accurately what's going to happen. That's why I'm not giving you predictions in my session. We're going to survive the future by being more prepared for whatever actually happens. Adaptability is a lot more important a skill than prediction. So the final thing you need to do is empower your people. And in MBA language, we call this autonomy. People work best when they have a sense that they are in charge, that they are in control. Now, of course, not everybody can be in charge. So just to give you a case study so you understand, it isn't just the Wild West where everybody does whatever they like. If you bought a Starbucks franchise, they would take you through Starbucks University and teach you how to run a Starbucks, and they would watch you like a hawk and make sure you did it perfectly. And then, when you had proven your mastery, if you're taking notes, that's an important statement. When you have proven your ability to do the job, you are then rewarded, another important concept, you are rewarded by saying, do you want to experiment a little bit? Do you want to try some stuff? So if you work at a Starbucks, you probably enjoy coffee and you want to try a little barista's blend in the corner. So you're allowed to do that. And it won't surprise you that the Starbucks stores that reward mastery with a little bit of, maybe the better word there is freedom. Maybe a good word there is independent responsibility. But it won't surprise you that those stores do not just better, but a lot better. Now, I know some of you are looking at me and saying, Graeme, you don't know my staff. Can't trust them to do that. And I'll tell you that that's a leadership problem, not a staff problem. And so I want to leave you with a model of leadership that I hope you go and have a look at. It comes from a US Navy submarine commander who gave autonomy to his crew. Now, let me just be clear. You do what you do in a business. But if a US nuclear submarine commander could give some autonomy to his crew, I'm not sure what excuse you've got. Okay? And go and listen to him. His name is David Marquette. He's written a fantastic book. But if you're not a big reader, there's a 12-minute TED Talk that'll blow your socks off. Here's 3.5 minutes of it.
I was trained for one submarine, my guys were trained to do what they were told. That's a deadly combination. We all know organizations where people just follow the leader into disastrous situations. So I got my guys together and I said, hey, we got a problem here. I was trained for another submarine. You're trained to do whatever nonsense comes out of my mouth. That's right, Captain. I mean, they knew. They already knew. I was pretty much talking to myself. So I said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do, guys? And we talked about it. Okay, what I really wanted to do was get ready for the inspection. But we were sitting in the wardroom. We spent a couple hours. We were talking about it. And we came up with all these different things. And, well, Captain, you just got to be smarter. You got to give better orders. It's like, well, how am I going to learn a whole nuclear submarine, miles of valves and pipes? I spent a year learning Olympia, 2 weeks over here. So in a year, we'll be safe? That's not going to work. We had to deploy the submarine in 6 months. So we talked about it, and they said, okay, there's only one logical solution. We figured it out. You, they're pointing at me, you shut up. And I thought about it, and you know what? They were right. So at that point, I vowed never to give another order. And if you came down on my submarine, it would have been very confusing, because you couldn't have pointed. It would have been hard to say, well, who's the captain here? Because you wouldn't have seen me giving orders. I did retain one order. The final order to launch a weapon, a torpedo or a missile, I kept with me, because I felt that since that was going to result in the deaths of other human beings, that I didn't want that on anyone's conscience but mine. That was my moral and ethical responsibility. But even though everything else in the Navy, there's long lists of things that says the captain has to authorize. Captain should authorize. You got a couple nukes in your group, they'll tell you it's true. Captain authorize, submerge the ship, get underway, start up the reactor, shut down the reactor, connect to shore power, divorce from shore power, on and on, break rig for dive, on and on and on, pages of these things. I just refused to give those orders. What we replaced it with was intent. Instead of giving instructions, if you want your people to think, don't give instructions, give intent. So they would come to you, hey, what do you want me to do? Well, left full rudder, steady course 255. No. I say, well, what are we trying to accomplish here today? Well, we're trying to get in position so that when the enemy submarine comes through, okay, so where do you think we should position the ship? Maybe over here. Good idea, go there. You give intent to them and they give intent to you. So my officer stopped requesting permission. And every other submarine, Captain, request permission to submerge the ship. Submerge the ship. Submerge the ship, aye. On Santa Fe, Captain, I intend to submerge the ship. Very well. And they did it. And it might seem like it's a very small, nuanced change of language, but it was hugely powerful, because the psychological ownership now shifts to them. They need to discover the answer. Otherwise, you're always the answer man. You can never go home and eat dinner. And so we started doing this. And it was hugely powerful. Actually, we went another step. Then I got smarter and I said, when the officer said, Captain, I intend to submerge the ship, I would ask him, well, what do you think I'm thinking right now? And he'd look at me, hard to tell. I'm guessing you're wondering whether it's safe. Bingo! I said, well, convince me it's safe. He said, Captain, I intend to submerge the ship. All men are below, hatches are shut, ship's rigged for dive. I checked the bottom depth. The submarine's in the water that's been assigned to us. Then later I would ask them, is it the right thing to do? And they would say, well, yes, sir, because our mission requires that we... And these are the two pillars that I think support this idea of giving control. These are the two pillars that need to be in place. The technical competence, which is represented by, is it safe? And the organizational clarity, which is represented by, is it the right thing to do? And you put those things in place, and then you can give control, and you give control, and you put those things in place. And you are off to the races.
Yeah, we could spend hours talking about that. Go and have a look. David Marquette, turn the ship around, watch that video, watch it with your team. But hopefully that inspires you to think that maybe you can shift, and it doesn't have to take years to make the shift. The shift is to give intent to your team and trust their competence, and if they don't have it, develop that competence and hand over psychological intent to them and build and empower a team that will help you to work out what experiments are going to be most useful and to create a vision of how to engage with a changing world with you. If you can get those right, you'll remove surprise from the equation. You will make sure that you are ready for whatever might happen and whatever is coming our way. Peter Drucker, a famous management guru of the last century, once said that the greatest danger in times of turbulence, and my word, we live in a time of turbulence now, don't we? The greatest danger is not the turbulence. The greatest danger is that you focus on the turbulence and you lose sight of the bigger picture. But the biggest danger is that you face tomorrow's world using yesterday's logic. Please don't do that. The slides will be available, I believe, by Monday. Apparently that sounded like giving intent rather than asking a question. But if you'd like my slides right now, you can get them at that website. I'll be around for the rest of today, so at the lunch break we can chat a bit. But if you don't get that opportunity, please feel free to connect with me. I want to help people like you and all across this country and in every industry to just understand that actually engaging with disruption and facing uncertain times doesn't have to be as scary and as difficult as maybe we think it is. Thank you.